Under the frigid waters of the Pacific Northwest, in the summer of 1859, two of the most powerful nations on Earth stood at the edge of war. Britain had warships. America had troops and artillery. Both sides were dug in and neither one was backing down. Diplomats paced. Officers waited for orders. And on the ground, in the actual dirt and grass where this all played out, the stakes felt enormous, even if the origin of the standoff seemed almost too small to believe. So what was worth risking a war between two great powers? A pig. One pig in one potato patch on one small island, and the story of how it very nearly changed history. The island in question was San Juan, a rugged, beautiful stretch of land tucked in the waters between Vancouver Island and the Washington mainland. It was the kind of place where fog rolled in off the strait, where farms and pastures sat close to rocky shoreline, and where two very different flags had reason to claim ownership. Years earlier, the United States and Great Britain had signed a treaty settling the border of the Oregon Territory. It was a good treaty, carefully negotiated, meant to put the whole boundary question to rest. Except for one problem. It said the line ran through the channel separating the mainland from Vancouver Island. Simple enough, until you actually looked at a map and realized there were two possible channels, not one. And San Juan Island sat right between them, claimed by both readings of the same treaty, a strip of contested ground born entirely out of ambiguous wording. Both nations claimed it. Both nations had people living on it. American settlers farmed there, working the land as if the border question had already been decided in their favor. So did the British Hudson's Bay Company, which ran a massive sheep operation on the island called Bellevue Farm, complete with its own workers, livestock, and infrastructure. For a while, they simply coexisted, two flags, one island, an uneasy but workable arrangement where farmers on both sides went about their business and mostly left the diplomacy to someone else. Then, on June 15th, 1859, a large black pig wandered into the wrong garden. The pig belonged to the Hudson's Bay Company. It had a habit of rooting around in the fields of a nearby American settler named Lyman Cutler, snuffling through soil that Cutler considered his own. On this particular morning, it found its way into Cutler's potato patch and helped itself, tearing up rows of plants that represented real labor and real food. Cutler, understandably frustrated at watching his crop get destroyed, grabbed his gun and shot it dead. Now, killing a neighbor's livestock is the kind of dispute that usually gets settled over a fence line, with a handshake and maybe a bit of grumbling, not with international law. Cutler offered to pay for the pig. The story goes he put up around $10, a fair price for a farm animal at the time, the sort of sum that should have closed the matter cleanly. But the farm's manager, Charles Griffin, wanted a great deal more, reportedly closer to $100, a demand that struck Cutler as wildly out of proportion to one dead pig. Cutler refused, and that's when things stopped being about a pig at all. British officials, backing the Hudson's Bay Company, suggested Cutler could be arrested and hauled off to face British authority. To the American settlers on that island, this wasn't a squabble over livestock anymore. It was a question of whose law actually applied to the ground beneath their feet, whose courts had jurisdiction, and whose nation they truly belonged to. A dead pig had somehow become a referendum on sovereignty. Word spread fast. The settlers, alarmed at the idea of being subject to British arrest on what they considered American soil, petitioned for protection, sending their concerns up through the chain of command with real urgency. The request worked its way up to General William S. Harney, who decided this was worth a show of force. He dispatched Captain George E. Pickett, yes, the very same Pickett who would later lead the doomed charge at Gettysburg, along with about 66 soldiers, to plant the American flag firmly on San Juan Island and make the United States position unmistakable. That got Britain's attention. Governor James Douglas, watching a foreign military unit land on contested territory, responded the way any government would when it sees soldiers moving onto disputed ground. He called on the Royal Navy. Warships began arriving in the waters around the island, their presence a clear signal that Britain had no intention of simply ceding the point. And here is where the whole affair tips from tense to almost unbelievable. Over the following weeks, Both sides kept raising the stakes, each escalation answered by another. American reinforcements arrived, with artillery rolled onto the bluffs overlooking the water, positioned as if a real battle might break out at any moment. The British buildup was even more staggering. Several warships, marines and sailors numbering in the thousands, anchored just offshore, guns trained on a strip of farmland that, weeks earlier, had been peacefully shared by settlers from both nations. By August, you had a tiny island, a few hundred American soldiers dug into earthworks, and a British fleet bristling with guns sitting in the harbor below them. All because of one pig rooting through one potato patch on one otherwise ordinary morning. And yet, the shot that started it all remained the only one ever fired in anger. No soldier, no sailor, no settler on either side was harmed, despite all that firepower gathered in one place. The pig, it turned out, would be the sole casualty of the entire standoff, a strange and almost merciful outcome given how close the two sides had come to open conflict. That restraint didn't happen by accident. It happened because cooler heads prevailed at the most critical possible moment. Governor Douglas wanted Royal Marines landed on the island, a move that could have provoked gunfire. But Royal Navy Captain Geoffrey Hornby held back, and when Rear Admiral Robert Lambert Baines arrived, he canceled the order. Baines is reported to have said that he would not involve two great nations in a war over a squabble about a pig. It's a wonderfully human moment buried inside a geopolitical crisis. Military commanders choosing common sense over escalation, even as the governor pressed for action, and in doing so, quietly preventing what could have become a much darker chapter in the histories of both nations. Word of the standoff eventually reached Washington, and President Buchanan, wanting no part of an actual war with Britain, sent one of the most respected military men in America to fix it, General Winfield Scott. Scott negotiated a solution that was, honestly, wonderfully simple. Both sides would occupy the island together, peacefully, until the border dispute could be settled properly through the usual channels of diplomacy rather than force. The British set up a camp on the island's north end. The Americans set up camp on the south. Each side eventually maintained a modest garrison compared to the fleets and forces that had briefly assembled at the height of the crisis. And rather than becoming a flashpoint, the arrangement became something else entirely, a genuinely friendly coexistence. For roughly 12 years, from 1860 to 1872, American and British troops on that small island reportedly shared holidays, attended each other's social gatherings, and by most accounts got along just fine. Two nation soldiers, living a stone's throw apart, choosing neighborliness over conflict, day after day, season after season. The actual boundary question was eventually settled the way disputes between nations sometimes are, not with more guns, but through arbitration. The Treaty of Washington in 1871 sent the matter to international arbitration, and the man chosen to decide it was, of all people, the German Emperor, Wilhelm I, an arbiter far removed from either side's interests. In 1872, he ruled in America's favor, placing the boundary through the Harrow Strait Channel and awarding the San Juan Islands to the United States, finally resolving the ambiguity that had started the whole affair 13 years earlier. British forces packed up and left peacefully later that year. No lasting grudge, just two nations that had once nearly gone to war over a pig, quietly moving on, the whole episode fading into the kind of story that sounds almost too strange to be history. Here's the part that still gives people chills when they visit today. The sites of both camps are still there. American camp and English camp are preserved today as the two halves of San Juan Island National Historical Park. You can walk the same ground where soldiers from two empires once occupied opposite ends of a contested island, and where, instead of firing on one another, they chose to wait, to talk, and eventually to live together peacefully. Because that's really what the Pig War teaches us. It's easy to remember history as a story of battles and conquests, of decisive charges and dramatic victories. But some of the proudest moments in a nation's history aren't the wars that were won. They are the wars that never had to happen at all, because ordinary people, and a few extraordinary ones, chose patience over pride when the easier, louder choice sat right in front of them. All these years later, that small island in the Pacific Northwest stands as a quiet monument to a bigger idea, that even when two great powers stand nose to nose, bristling with warships and artillery, there's always room for someone to simply say, "Not over this," and mean it.